Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome our viewing audience to another session of our Ed Talk series. I am Andrea Ferrari, founder and CEO at Whole Schools International, and together with my partner, Gabriela Gonzalez Pacheco, Director of Programs, we have created these innovative space to inspire conversations around education during these unprecedented times. Today, we specifically welcome a warm welcome to the school community at Colegio Menor in Quito, Ecuador. And happy to greet you here today and discuss as education changes. At Whole Schools, we believe that it is equity, well-being, and happiness, the keys to a sustainable change that can face the challenges of the short and long-term consequences. And for that reason, we gather here with our educational experts, our school leaders, our opinion leaders that can guide us with their international perspectives as we co-create the new landscape in education. It is an honor today to host Mr. Andrew Sherman from Colegio Menor Quito in Ecuador. Andrew has been a longtime colleague and friend. He has vast experience in serving and leading international schools in the Latin American market, in Mexico specifically, Brazil, and currently in Ecuador, where Andrew led an important effort in opening the markets for US accredited schools, multi-campus school system in Ecuador. He is with us today to discuss the Compassion Project. Hello and welcome, Andrew. We are muted still.
Thank you. I'm happy and excited to be here with you. And I'm excited as always to talk about schools, and it's great to reconnect with Andrea and get to know Gabriela and the work that they're doing with Whole Schools. And we're very excited to be able to share some of the work we do at Colegio Menor around student well-being, happiness, and this Compassion Project.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome again. Welcome, Gabriela. As we initiate our conversation, we were very curious during one of our talks earlier, Andrew, about this idea of creating a project based around compassion, based around values, based around character, and how that has become really relevant during these unprecedented times. Please tell us a little bit more about what guided this and what were the objectives around your Compassion Project.
Sure. So I think we always recognize that we need to be committed to continuous improvement, recognize what the needs of our community are, what we can do to help prepare students to be productive, positive members of a community, at least initially in a school, and then beyond that, right? Because we're really forming the next generation of adults who will have impact on the societies we all participate in. So we took this action research idea around, let's not just talk about character in a superficial, monthly theme type of way, and really begin to think about how does it become part of our curriculum, part of our explicit learning experiences. And we did a research in which we asked students a little bit about how they understood compassion. What did it look like? We did a reading with them, and then we did interviews with the students. It was a project that was based out of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, along with our sister university here, which is Universidad San Francisco de Quito. And in these interviews, we found that you could actually teach and should consider teaching these values like compassion. And the research produced something called a learning pathway, the compassion learning spiral, where students go through a learning process to be able to understand what compassion looks like, and then also to apply it in lots of different ways in their lives when confronting a problem or confronting an issue. So this spiral that we talk about starts with a recognition that others can be in a bad situation or in a negative circumstance, and we need to understand and empathize with this suffering or loss. And once that's done, and once you're able to sort of connect students to their individual experience and empathize with another group of individuals or another person, they're then able to evaluate the setting, right? So we help students evaluate what's going on so that they're better able to understand how they're feeling and how others are feeling. From that, we take some sort of action. We care, we demonstrate concern, we help one another out. And what we recognize through the research is this final step of unfolding, because there's this intrinsic satisfaction that comes from helping others that then allows you to apply compassion, care, concern in other settings. And that's the Compassion Project, really getting to an idea where there's these explicit learning pathways around these values, these aspects of character traits that need to be explicitly taught to young people, practiced by young people, so that they can then apply that in multiple ways for them to feel good about who they are, for them to add and contribute to the well-being of others.
Oh, Andrea, I love what you've said. I'm sorry, Andrea. It's just that I think Andrea and I were both very passionate about all the programs that involve social emotional skills, but especially when you talk about preparing kids for this social awareness, you know, so that they can be true global citizens, I guess. And during this time that we've gone through, and all the change that is going to bring about, you know, for society, and we need to prepare our students to get there and just be ready to deal with the problems, solve them in a positive way, but certainly in a way that shows that they are aware of others and their problems, and that they can't move forward unless it's, you know, in consumption with others. So I think that's amazing that you would do this, and I think, how relevant did you find it to the moment? Did it help students in a way to cope with the situation that that we're all facing through this pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, the research is something that sticks with us, right? So the research is performed in an earlier point in time, but I think it's always part of our conversation as a school to consider the well-being of each and every individual in the school, not only our students, but our teachers, our faculty, our administration. We're all going through, I think, a very difficult moment where, you know, in a pretty traumatic way, our lives were changed drastically from one day to the next. And I mentioned, as we start to always with the staff, as we start to gravitate towards a reopening, it's going to be equally traumatic, because it's been a year in which we've been away from school, or a year and some months, and what it's going to look like is a lot different when we get back to our quote unquote more regular operations as professionals or experiences as students. And we always have to keep our finger on the pulse of how people are feeling, what their experience has been. It's been difficult to be at home for all of us. It's been especially difficult for some of our older students that are used to student life and activities that go beyond being in the home. And we're trying to be very aware of what their needs are, constantly asking students in surveys and in conversations, developing relationships. I think it's essential now that when we recognize that content is really at our fingertips, really educational information and content, we can do Google searches off our iPhones, and we can probably get some really solid information about different disciplines. But what really matters is this interpersonal connection. And I think if anything, we realize at the other end of the pandemic, when we get back to school, is how important relationships are, and how important it is to connect with one another, and how really emotional, kind of visceral, kind of effective is learning and teaching, and how much it requires that type of connection between people. So yeah, compassion and care should always be a part of what we do. I think, as you mentioned, it's become even more relevant in this moment where we're all working through the trauma of changes, drastic changes in our lives. And I think it's really essential for us to understand that young people need to be cared for and talked to and communicated with about these issues related to their emotions, their connections to others, and to be people of character.
Gabriela and I think we would really agree with you that the social and the emotional, specifically the emotions, are the gatekeepers of our learning, of our cognition, of our motivation, of our attention. So when we go back to school, or even if we're still in remote, I like what you said about going beyond simple value lessons, or beyond character themes that normally a school might have in past, had a monthly theme going on where different values were emphasized and different pillars of our character counts programs, for example, were worked on. And I like where you said that this needs to unfold as a cycle. There's a teaching component where we explicitly teach, and then we expect it to trickle down into the actions that result from this positive learning experience. So I guess my question would be, in thinking about explicitly teaching, what do schools need to not lose sight of as we are teaching these competencies? What would you say were the competencies that are tied to the Compassion Project that can be explicitly taught, that are needed for student success in extracurriculars, in work, and beyond? So how could we explicitly teach this? For Gabriela and I know it becomes a big part of teaching happiness, right? And
so there's a couple of ways we've approached it. We've decided to create well-being courses that are designed specifically to address these issues, these competencies around care, concern, empathy, understanding others, understanding ourselves, how to be a productive community member, how to contribute in positive ways to global issues and take local action. We talk a lot about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and what does that mean for us to contribute to the well-being of the planet. But I think you need to integrate them in maybe perhaps standalone courses without siloing, because you don't want them to become, we only talk about well-being in the well-being class. But you definitely make sure that you create spaces for educators to understand the importance of relationships, the importance of values in connecting students to themselves and connecting them to others, so that they really, in essence, as you mentioned, connect their emotions to learning, because young people are using their learning to construct an understanding of themselves and the world around them. And that's a really important part for us to be connected to our emotions, connected to our feelings, to really be able to do that in a productive, positive, growth-oriented way. So there's a couple of ways of approaching it. You never want to lose it as part of the conversation. CTs, homerooms, advising. You have a lot of opportunities to do social, emotionally explicit social, emotional learning out there in those spaces, the well-being courses, and then also just to be aware and cognizant of making it a part of how you operate as an adult with students in almost every moment of interaction, and as adults to other adults, because the community has to share this approach to well-being and happiness and care for one another.
I think that's a big piece of it. Wouldn't you say, Gabby? The community component, that feeling of belonging, of relating to each other. I want to highlight something that you said just now, Andrew, about creating that positive school environment. How do we go about doing that when sometimes we're surrounded by all this negative language, specifically in reference to bullying and such? How do you guys go about that?
That's a great point. We just had a discussion about that yesterday in one of our continuous development committees, and we were looking at the component of behavior and social emotional learning. And one of the things that we've adopted here is this concept of restorative practices, of understanding of perhaps a negative action or something that falls short of kind of our behavioral expectations, and how do you process that in a positive, growth-oriented way, and how do you make sure that students recognize that their actions go beyond something that they did and have an impact on the classroom or on the entire community, and have conversations around how to give back to the community and how to always make sure that students understand that they're inserted into a community, and that insertion has to be done in a responsible, productive way. And we often talk about community generally. I think we recognize that community is an important value that we have. We use the language around community. We try to stay away from the pejorative language around bullying and negative things, and always try to create a positive, growth-oriented shift to that. Because what is, bullying? Bullying is the failure of relationships. And so you can talk about bullying and have anti-bullying policies and things like that, but it's very much a focus on the negative. And a lot of what we talk about here is that our values are about building positive relationships, and what positive relationships do to contribute to the well-being of oneself and others.
Andrea, I love the emphasis that you place on you cannot care for others if you don't feel cared for, no? Or you cannot create relationships when you don't feel like you belong or you are valued by the community. So yes, as you said, I think it's about laying the foundations, no, on the things that need to be at the background for kids to really grow in this way. And as you did say, kids will have developmental moments where they won't make it, and it's okay if we have a growth mindset, as you said, and we just help them along and just make them feel like we are with them while they're learning. And that would be like compassion in their learning, and compassion that they will then replicate with others, right?
Yeah, I think what we're always looking to do is that sense of validation or affiliation is really important. Because it's one way that we have to, one filter we use to discuss or consider ethical decisions, right? So we talk a lot about ethical decision making, and what does that look like, and how do I make good decisions that are healthy and positive for me, but also shed positive light on who I am as an individual. We deal a lot with this with digital citizenship, as you could imagine, and having students recognize their digital footprint and what that looks like, and posting things on internet, which never really quite goes away or can be shared. And the whole conversation around what it means to be a good digital citizenship right now is directly connected and related to feeling part of something beyond oneself, feeling part of a community of learners, feeling part of a classroom, and what does that look like, and what does that mean, and as we said before, understanding that I'm a part of something in order for me to understand my responsibility to care for others.
Okay, responsibility to care for others sounds amazing. And how do we keep track of all this, Andrew? Because another important thing that we've been focusing on at Whole Schools is how we can, what we cannot measure, we cannot manage. And I think that data protocols become so important in a school. How do we keep track of compassion and things that are so untangible and that can be so subjective? Have you found a way that we can
I always think that, we've developed surveys around, do I have an adult advocate in the school, someone I can talk to? How do I feel about coming to school? Do I need support now that I'm in at the home because of the pandemic? So there's a lot that we do through our social and emotional learning and our counseling department to survey students on a regular basis to find out a little bit more of where they're at. We just had, a whole week at the high school level about let's stop the content right now and just connect with one another. Let's play games. Let's understand where we're at. Let's refocus on relationships. We had a similar thing in the middle school and the elementary school about playing electronic games. And it gave us an opportunity to talk about, once again, digital citizenship, but it also gave us an opportunity to connect with one another. And at any point in time where we do these activities, we're surveying students. How did this make you feel? Where are you at now? How are you feeling about school? How are you feeling about the current public health crisis? Do you feel connected to people in your home? Do you feel connected to other students? So this ongoing survey with of course, the older students, we're talking usually these survey instruments are designed for 3rd or 4th grade and beyond. But we found that the survey instruments give us a real opportunity to think about the activities we offer. It gives us an opportunity to keep our finger on the pulse of where students are at. We have ongoing, pretty consistent meetings with student leadership, student government, so that they can give us feedback and let us know about where they're at and where they feel their students or their colleagues are at. So there's definitely ways and mechanisms and forums to do it. The data collection generally comes through survey instruments that are both used with our teachers, our students, and also are sent home about parent perception of work, and if there's too much homework, and what are we going to do about that, and how do we calibrate, this moment in time where, all work is homework right now because they're working virtually. And I just wrote a blog about, what does that look like when all work is now at home and it's all homework, because the home is now an educational laboratory. We talked a lot about what does that look like in terms of workload and adjusting that in positive ways so that students aren't overwhelmed or aren't, lulled into some catatonic state because they're connected 8 hours a day doing work and another 4 hours.
Right, zombified.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got kids at home, and we see that happen often, no? And it's almost like you want to shake them and say, "Hey, take a break, stop, breathe in the fresh air, get up." And they've gone from being sitting on the desk to being like in a horizontal position on their bed, and then just it's all over the place. So it's right what you said about supporting the surroundings and their environment, because we do know this, and I like that you talk about measuring and keeping the pulse, because we know that when children feel good, they will definitely learn better. And it's all about, being able to listen to those voices and really taking it from I guess what I'm thinking of now are the different dimensions of well-being. As per the OECD model, we know we've got the academic dimension, academic well-being, then the more social and relationships that you've been mentioning throughout, and as well as psychological, and then the physical. And we know that when our kids are sleeping well and their routines, right, of eating healthy and getting enough exercise, all of that will influence. So in a way, it goes back to those competencies, Andrew, of I guess it's important to teach them this now, that self-awareness piece, self-management, right? And those skills that will lead them to responsible decision-making. Wouldn't you say, Gabby?
Yes, and what I kept thinking right now when you were saying all this, I think it's a question of just being able to point kids towards what's coming, and not just, what's going on right now, and just being blocked by all the things and all the frustration of this moment, and just being able to really look ahead and say, look, yes, right now it's not a good moment, but what's coming ahead and what you will need in order to overcome difficulties and be better prepared to change the world. No, it's learning how to deal with this right now, but without losing sight of that. So I don't know, how has this been clearer for your students? Is this something that that they have an ability to connect with, I guess?
Yeah, well, we often talk about, our focus on student learning and it being really emanating from the student. It starts with the student, and we need to be very student-centered in our focus when we talk about teaching and learning. And I think one of the elements of that is to empower them, right, in ways that they understand that there's going to be, crucibles and obstacles and difficult moments that they need to address. And part of, I think, what we need to do and understand is that, we have to explicitly teach resilience, right? So that, coming across difficult moments and then understanding different pathways to overcome those are really important for us to help guide students in, right? That, we learn from our errors, we learn from our mistakes, we come to a better understanding of what to do to improve and what to do to make sure that we can avoid those situations in the future. And I think that kind of growth mindset needs to be embedded in all that we do. because that's the growth mindset allows us to sort of challenge, those difficult moments with our inner strength, our fortitude, and be able to recognize our ability to move beyond, to accomplish something further in terms of not to address the moment, but to sort of plan for new and better moments somewhere in the future. So I think that kind of conversation we hope is embedded in our classrooms around growth mindset, overcoming obstacles. I think that's part of what you're able to do or able to consider as part of regular instruction. It's about how you talk about student assessment, right? It's not that you are an A or a B or a C student or a 90, 80, 70 student, that maybe you're not where you want to be. And we use not yet often in part of our standards evaluations. You're not yet where you want to be, but doesn't mean you're not going to get there. And so I think that positive understanding of how we, talk to students about their individual activities, their individual student production is really important, that we keep it focused on ideas of improvement, ideas of learning is not always a linear path. A lot of it is about, detours and not having exactly everything you need at that moment, but over time that you want to develop skills and abilities that are both, for your academic cognitive development, but you can also develop skills and competencies over time that are related to your social and emotional well-being.
Oh, I love that. Yes, I agree.
Thanks for reminding us that resilience is a skill that can be taught. And we feel the same about happiness. It's part of these key sustainable pillars that are going to lead us into, this shift and whereby no matter what comes or next, kids will be better prepared, because it's all about being able to adapt, right? As you said, different obstacles to overcome. And a lot of times when we interview parents and they're looking for a school for their children, I'd say that more and more now, a high percentage, 99% of parents, I will be as bold to say, are looking for a school where their children will be happy. And oftentimes they might not realize what that happiness really means, because do we really want to keep our kids in a bubble and shelter them from every adversity and deprive them of being able to face difficulties and resolve them, right, on their own? So it goes back to the simple idea that that happiness can be taught, it can be learned, and it can be practiced. And it's simply about giving them those tools, as you were mentioning, that awareness for them to build resilience and to adapt. Thank you for reminding us that all of this can be looked at through the lens of compassion for ourselves. You talked about that a lot, and we love that with Gabriela. We know that we try to practice that a lot, don't we, Gabby, at Whole Schools? Compassion for our peers, compassion for our school, our community, and specifically for the planet. And with that, I'd like to invite you to wrap up with some closing remarks, maybe some advice on how all of this, has some implications in the importance for developing our ethical decision-making, and more than that, living self-fulfilled lives, Andrew.
Yeah, and we talked about that in one of our earlier meetings to prepare for this discussion. And I do think one of the key takeaways or key products of a quality education needs to be by students over time of, what it means for me as an individual to lead a self-fulfilling life. And that's going to look unique to each individual student. And I think it's important for us to recognize that we're facilitators. We're not going to define it for them. We're going to give them the tools. We're going to give them the competencies. We're going to provide them the overall environment. We're going to choreograph a learning moment for them to really develop these aspects of who they are and how they see themselves in the future. And I think it's really important, as you mentioned, that this is very much an emotional connection, an emotional relationship between what I learn and what I take away from that learning to better understand who I am and the path I want to be on.
That was super deep and philosophical. We love to close on that note to give our viewing audience things to deeply think about. So we really thank you. A huge thank you to Andrew Sherman, to the Colegio Menor in Quito from Nord Anglia Education. We admire and deeply appreciate, deeply grateful for the amazing work that's being done, and happy to be a part of it and to be connected to you, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriela. Thank you, Andrea, for your time. It's always nice to have an opportunity to talk about the great work that educators do around, caring for and being advocates for the well-being of young people, because that's where it starts.
Woohoo! And with that, I think it's a wrap. A big hug.